This is Perspectives, a bi-weekly investment podcast brought to you by Escala Partners. In a world cluttered with information, Perspectives cuts through the noise to bring you insights and commentary on global financial markets, economics, and geopolitical news and events.
Welcome to Escala Investment Perspectives. Today we're bringing you a dispatch from the Milken Institute Global Conference 2026 in Los Angeles, one of the key gatherings where investors, policymakers, and business leaders compare notes in real time. The backdrop this year is complex. Rising geopolitical tensions, persistent questions around resiliency of supply chains, and of course huge optimism around AI. So the big question is, are we heading into a more fragile world or a more opportunity-rich one? Joining me is our CIO, Tracey McNaughton, who's been on the ground at Milken, speaking with the capital allocators and executives. Tracey, welcome. How's the land of the free?
Hi, Ed. It's a little bit chilly here in Boston at the moment. Nice and warm in LA, but several degrees cooler in Boston.
Yeah, I'll bet. All right, Tracey, you've been roaming the halls at Milken earlier this week, but before we get into that, tell us how it feels on the ground in the US right now.
Well, yeah, as you say, Ed, I spent earlier this week in LA with Milken, and I'm now in Boston. An obvious indicator for me that I always look at when I travel is the price of petrol. So in LA, petrol prices are currently $6.35 a gallon, which I guess sounds high to us, but converted into Aussie dollars and in per litre terms, it's around $2.30 per litre, which is still higher than where we sit currently. I think we're now below $2, Ed, but for LA, that's 50% up on their pre-war levels. In Boston, it's significantly different. They are at $4 a gallon. And I asked an Uber driver why they're so high in LA, and he said it was due to California state taxes. Now, these taxes, that resonated with me. When I checked out of my room in LA, it listed the room rate, and then under that, for each day, the bill listed 11 lines of taxes, state and local. And in total, the taxes were equivalent to 26% of the room rate. So I get the impression that California is struggling under the weight of debt. There was talk while I was there of a wealth tax for California being introduced. And on the news, residents are being asked to pay extra to keep the street lights on in their neighborhood. I got onto the topic of cost of living with my Uber driver. Uber was charging me $45 for a trip to the airport from the hotel. And the driver told me he receives about $16 of that. He made the point that the minimum wage for working at McDonald's was $18 an hour. So he's working for below the minimum wage. I asked him if Uber drivers were dropping out as a result, and he said yes. And that kind of makes sense because I also saw a lot of Waymo cars. These are the driverless cars, Ed, everywhere in LA. So Uber drivers are being priced out of the market.
Interesting, and an early sign too of where AI is replacing jobs. So, Tracey, let's now go on to Milken. You mentioned before you left that there were over 300 sessions across two hotels, the Beverly Wilshire and the Beverly Hilton.
Yeah, it was amazing, Ed, and grateful to Principal for the invite. It was really quite intense. There was a density of people and ideas that was genuinely hard to process in real time. You walk from one room to another and you go from a conversation about AI reshaping the global economy and putting data centers in space to geopolitics fracturing decades-old alliances to healthcare breakthroughs that are redefining longevity. And then in between, you walk past Tom Brady and Serena Williams and Shaquille O'Neal. There were some big names there, as there is every year. There's an underground tunnel that connects the Beverly Wilshire to the Hilton. And that's what everyone used to switch sessions between the two hotels. And along it are framed pictures of the people they've had there before, from actors, entertainers to CEOs, royalty and politician. It was a serious conference about the problems in the world, the ideas to solve them, and the capital to fund those ideas. There was a line in one of the opening sessions that really captured it. And it said, the people in this room do not observe history, they shape it, which was interesting.
Tracey, talk about Michael Milken. He's obviously well known in the bond world for helping to shape the junk bond market. How did he arrive at creating this conference, which has been running now annually for almost 30 years?
Yeah, I think 29 years actually. The Milken Institute is the vehicle through which Michael Milken advances his core idea, and that is if you connect the right ideas, the right capital, and the right people, you can solve the world's problems that neither governments nor markets alone can solve. That's his philosophy. And the global conference is essentially the institute in action.
Tracey, what's the underlying theme this year, if you had to distill it?
Well, rewiring is a word that came up a lot. There's a recognition that we're not just in a cycle, we're in a structural shift. The global economy is being rebuilt, reindustrialized was used a lot to make it more resilient. I had a chat with a large infrastructure investor in the hallway between sessions, and he said something along the lines of, "This is the best environment we've seen in decades because governments are finally writing checks again." The other focus was on compute, and Michael Milken's first sentence when he came on stage was, "The United States is short on power, short on compute." He doesn't believe there is an AI bubble. He thinks, in fact, the opposite is true. I spoke to somebody allocating to data centers who said, "This is the closest thing we have to a toll road on the AI economy." I thought that was a pretty interesting way of framing the AI build-out.
Tracey, what would you say was the most eye-popping session you went to?
Oh, I think I would have to say the session on space tech. I've already relayed my thoughts on this several times today in various PE and VC meetings. The whole session focused on finding solutions to the problems of doing things in space: launch, data transmission, heat, dispersion, regulation, defense. One of the speakers said, "Space isn't about technology anymore, it's about industrialization."
Industrialization in space.
Yeah, exactly. You think about it, SpaceX didn't invent rockets. They just made them cheaper, repeatable, and scalable. The same idea now applies to everything else up there. One founder described it as taking terrestrial tech and putting it into space. The idea is that space needs its own infrastructure layer, like cloud computing, but for orbit.
Okay, Tracey, so let's talk specifics. What actually happened that got your attention?
Well, this was pretty amazing. A company successfully got a large language model to learn in space. That doesn't sound, too exciting, I know, until you realize that one of the problems running supercomputers is the heat the chips generate. And in space, there's nowhere for heat to go. There's no air. It's a vacuum. So this company solved that problem by building a radiator light enough and efficient enough to be launched into space. They then trained a large language model on Shakespeare, no less. They did that on Earth. And the breakthrough was that the model learned in space.
A supercomputer that was able to learn in space was the breakthrough. But what did it learn?
Well, because it learned the full text of Shakespeare, it learned how to speak with a Shakespearean tongue. The co-founder and CEO of this company called Space Cloud, which is a holding, by the way, in the private equity fund of our sister wealth manager, SCS, told the story of how he was alone in a hotel room in Helsinki where he was giving a speech at the time, and he received a WhatsApp from his team, and it's a line of AI generated Shakespeare that came from the satellite in orbit. Everyone thought this couldn't be done because of heat.
Sounds like he could be another Sam Altman. So what does this do for the space industry?
Well, I think he could be another Sam Altman. He's 39 years old. He looked like a kid. He was the most meek and mild person on the stage at Milken. The point is that every breakthrough unlocks another problem to solve. You solve launch with SpaceX, now it's heat. You solve heat with Space Cloud, now it's data transmission. That's being solved with increasing the number of ground stations that can receive the data from satellites. Satellites can only send data when passing over a ground station. So ground infrastructure is just as important as the satellites themselves. And one of the speakers even mentioned Australia as being a recent destination for these ground stations. The next problem to solve is defence.
Space defence?
Yeah, space is no longer about strategic advantage, it's strategic necessity. A former admiral on the panel made the point that in conflict, your infrastructure becomes a target. We're now in an era where our satellites become targets. Ground stations are targets. Even communication links can be jammed or hacked.
It's all fascinating, but where does it hit us day to day?
Well, there's two big ways. First, on connectivity. They talked about the last 3 billion people coming online via satellites. And it's not just people, but machines, sensors, infrastructure, everything will be connected via satellite. And the second is energy and compute. There's a real push to move data centers into space. And why would that be the case? Well, because on Earth, we're running out of power capacity.
So we solve Earth's energy problem by exporting the problem to orbit.
Yes. The panel spoke about moving non-essential industry off planet. So we've been talking for a little while. You have reshoring, that's bringing industry back home for control and security reasons. You have offshoring, sending it offshore for efficiency reasons. And now we have a third option, off-worlding, for anything that is too constrained on Earth.
It's a big leap.
Yeah, I know it is. That's why it was so amazing, this session. But, they were serious, Ed. And their point was, why mine minerals here when there are asteroids full of raw materials? Why manufacture here if space offers advantages like zero gravity production, or even something called cold welding, where metals fuse together just by touching in vacuum? This is happening, and it's happening in real time.
Tracey, from eye-popping to excitement, and judging by the photos you sent back to us, I'm guessing the most exciting session for you was the one where Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, was being interviewed.
Yes, absolutely. I heard him enough times on earnings calls, etc., but to see him in person was a thrill. One of the key ideas he walked through was what the shift from generative AI to agentic AI means for the demand for compute. So generative AI, what we've all been using the last couple of years, is about producing outputs. You give it a prompt, it writes something, creates an image, maybe some code, but agentic AI is different. That's AI that can reason, plan, and take action. It doesn't just give you an answer. It actually goes off and does the task. It has agency. And that's a big step change. He said once you move into reasoning, planning, and action, the compute required jumps dramatically. And he put a figure on it. It was 1,000 times more compute compared to earlier generative models. And then you layer on top of that more users, and suddenly you understand why everything is under pressure. Chips, data centers, energy. This ties back to his broader point that this isn't just a software story, it's an infrastructure build out. He talks about the 5 layers of the cake: energy, chips, infrastructure, that is data centers that he calls AI factories, models, and then the 5th layer is applications.
So, Tracey, did the issue of job destruction come up?
Yes, and he pushed back hard, as you'd probably expect, on the idea that AI is just destroying jobs. He said the first thing it's actually doing is creating them across all of these layers. And I discovered this myself. I found myself talking to a woman from Arizona. I mentioned all of the data centers, and I said to her, how does it feel to be inundated with all of these big box buildings? And she said it was fine. They were on the outskirts of town, and actually they were creating a lot of jobs for the locals. Jensen talked about chip plants, computer plants, and AI factories, and said this could drive a huge wave of reindustrialization. And And then he gave a really practical example with radiology. AI became better at analyzing scans. This was one of the first real breakthroughs with AI in a practical sense. And there was all the talk about how AI was then going to replace radiologists. There weren't going to be any radiologists anymore. But instead of replacing radiologists, it actually made them more productive. They were able to do more scans, hospitals made more money, and they hired more radiologists.
So again, it comes back to that distinction between automating tasks and eliminating entire roles.
Well, exactly. He said people confuse the two. AI takes over tasks, but the purpose and breadth of the job expands. In health now, thanks to AI, we're no longer looking at treating the symptoms. Instead, the growth area is in prevention, and that was mentioned quite a lot at the conference. That said, he wasn't dismissing disruption. He made a pretty clear point. If you're entering the workforce now and you're not fluent in AI, you're already behind.
So Tracey, what about the next constraint in the system? Because if compute demand is scaling that quickly, something has to give. And a lot of people are pointing to energy.
Yes, and he was very direct on that. He said one of the biggest opportunities AI creates is actually upgrading the power grid, because now you've got real demand and people willing to pay for it, including governments, but also companies. So whether it's nuclear, renewables, whatever, the economics start to line up. And he even suggested companies like his might help support that investment just to make sure the system can keep up.
Okay, and just finally, stepping back from all that, the shift to agentic AI, the infrastructure build-out and job creation, what's the main idea he leaves you with, Tracey?
Well, for me, it's that we're moving into a phase where AI actually does things, not just says things. That's the shift from generative to agentic, and it changes the economics completely. I met with General Catalyst today here in Boston. They're a private equity venture capital firm, and they made the point that particularly in the services industry, there is a lot of mundane paperwork we do. Agentic AI can solve for that and free us up to do the more interesting things with our clients. And the second thing, it's already happening. This isn't 5 or 10 years away. This is happening in real time now. The demand, the build out, the hiring, it's all happening right now. So it feels less like a future story and more like we're already in the middle of it and we're watching it in real life, in real time.
I imagine that's why the room was so engaged. Thanks, Tracey. That's all we have time for. And of course, travel safe back home. Hope everyone enjoyed the update, and we look forward to you joining us for the next podcast. Until then, please take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Escala Perspectives podcast. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. You can connect with Tracey by visiting escalapartners.com.au. Escala Partners is a corporate authorized representative of Escala Wealth Management, which holds its own AFSL. This podcast has been prepared without consideration of specific client investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is for general information purposes only. Please don't rely on it for the purpose of making an investment decision. You should seek independent financial and taxation advice prior to making any investment decisions in relation to any of the content considered in the podcast, and consider any relevant disclosure documents. If you require any further information regarding the matters discussed on the podcast, please contact Escala Partners.